This is some holly which is growing in the lane. I planted this to make a new hedge, so I'm now going to try and take some cuttings from it. You don't really need very much material. That's good for several cuttings. I'll just take a little bit more. There, so that's enough to do a few cuttings. Let's go and see how we do the cuttings. This is the method I use for taking cuttings, very much influenced by the work of Christopher Lloyd, particularly one of his books, The Adventurous Gardener. So I use as a medium John Innes seed compost. That contains superphosphate essentially, which helps promote root growth. Fill the pot till there is a bit of a watering space at the top, so I don't know, half an inch, something like that down. And then you need a sharp knife, and by sharp it should be able to, for example, if you take a piece of paper and hold it like that, it should be easily able to cut it. So you want that type of... So the Stanley replaceable blades are very good. This is one I've sharpened myself. And then in terms of material to use, you don't need very much. Just a small piece is fine. If you take off just below a node, like that, again, having the sharp knife means you can get a very good cut, and also cut off the leaves, and that should give you a reasonable... You can probably take one more leaf off. That then is a sort of cutting material. Now, to try and increase the chance of this rooting, we use something called a hormone rooting compound. Now, hormones are a plant messenger, and they tell the plant to create roots, which is what you want. So we put the cutting in a little bit of water and then dip it into the hormone rooting compound, and then we need some method of putting this in here without scraping off all the hormone from the cutting. So you can either use a stick or just a finger like that. Put that thing in gently and leave it like that. If you're worried about botrytis and other fungal diseases, you can use a fungicide. At the moment I'm not going to bother. I don't think there's much for a worry about this. And then keep this, well, in my case it's going to be in an outdoor heated cutting frame, so that it should get bottom heat, which is essential for, or helps enormously in the formation of roots at the bottom. So the method here is to put about 10 of these cuttings around the outside of the pot. That means to say you've got a lot of genetic material, because not all of them are going to work, but hopefully quite a number of them will, and you're not using up much space, which is important if you've only got a limited cutting garden as I have. This then is my pot of cuttings. These have been all done with powder, this hormone rooting compound here. So what I normally do is make a label before I start, so that you've got the labels readily available. That's a tip I learned from Beth Chatto, another great English gardener. Always have the labels done first, so that you can put the thing in, and that you're not writing labels with wet hands and whatnot. And then that will then go into the cutting garden, and hopefully by next spring these will have rooted, and there'll be new holly trees. Just an amazing thing. That doesn't always work. Sometimes they just brown and die, or they get other troubles and fail to root, but when they do root, it's just marvellous. Using a powdered hormone rooting compound, there are now a number of rooting compounds or rooting gels. I don't really know how good they are. I've tended to use a powder before, so what I'm doing now is an experiment where I will take another pot of cuttings, and these will be done using the rooting gel. So rather than the powder, I'm using the rooting gel. So I'll essentially the same procedure. And then when I've completed those, I'll have another label here that I've already made, and that says gel on here, so I can see if there's any difference in performance come springtime, whether one compound works better than the other. I often find it's best to do practical experiments like this to see what works and what doesn't work, rather than reading all the journals and things, because everything depends on the location, how fresh the materials are, many variables. So it's really what works in your location that matters. There's no obvious limit to what you can propagate this method. It really is just a question of trying and see what works for you. This is a rose cutting. I don't know what the cultivar is, but a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So it's an experiment really to see how well this particular rose propagates. So again, I'll cut off below a node, remove all signs of flowers and seeds. Probably This is potentially good enough. Maybe trim the amount of leaf back. So you've just got a very small cutting like that. Again, use hormone rooting compound. I'm going to do one with powder and one with gel. So there's a good coverage of powder over there, and then making a dipping hole and putting the cutting in and gently firming it down, and then go around again. So essentially it's a repeat of what I did with the hollies, and then again I've got the labels pre-made, which I think is a big saving in everything. Makes everything a lot more convenient. So I'll do some roses and then put them in the propagate. I'll normally I do these things over many days, so I just do a little bit and then next day do a little bit more, rather than going mad and try and do it all at once. So those are my 2 pots of roses. I'm really just experimenting to see. Yes, me dog's coming to see what's going on. Just to see what happens, how they go. Roses are normally grown on a rootstock, so Rosa rugosa or something like that, a wild rootstock, and that's why you get the suckers coming up. Here I'm trying to grow the roses on their own roots. There are commercially it's no bad idea, because you want to make as many roses as possible. So you would graft on small amounts of the cultivar you wanted onto the rugosa rootstock. Here I'm just trying to see what happens, whether I can grow these things on their own roots or not. Often you can. So it's just an experiment really, and I'll do quite a range of other plants just to see how they go on and how they propagate. It does vary by the season, by the year, by all sorts of things like that, which are very difficult to you can't really control. So you just try things. That's really, I just find it exciting and interesting to try things, just to see what happens and what doesn't happen, and try and remember it for the future. Commercially, you would normally have bottom heat and also a mist propagation with fungicides in them. That's a very complicated procedure, really beyond what an amateur gardener like me can do. So I just tend to go quite as simple as possible, just to take the basic stuff, small cuttings, use a hormone rooting compound, and use bottom heat, and see how it goes. So these are my plants in the propagation frame. It's as I showed when I showed it being constructed, it's quite small. That means you really want to have the plants in as small a pot as possible, and this you give, I don't know, 6 to 10 cuttings around the side of each plot here, so you can get a lot of different cuttings in here. The ones that don't survive, they don't survive. The other ones that do, it's just a delight to have grown or cloned really the original plant. So I'll just leave them, and hopefully by springtime they will have rooted.